Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to express my thanks to the Honourable Member for Wrexham for bringing this important debate forward today, and I wish to thank him for his considered and thoughtful approach to this very important issue. We've heard today, Madam Chair, a number of speakers talking about their genuine concerns regarding the changes to the Independent Living Fund, and the Honourable Member for Wrexham set out very clearly and very poignantly the case of his particular constituent, Nathan Davis, and why this fund, reminding us why this fund is so important. It's worthy of our attention because this fund is vital to those living with disabilities, a fund specifically designed to help those with a disability to live independently in our communities, providing additional financial assistance to those already in receipt of support from social services to provide them with the funds necessary to access essential support, something we should all be able to support without any equivocation. And threats to this fund, or any threats to reduce this fund, make it harder for those living with a disability to live independent lives. Who on earth would support that? The UK Government's closure of this scheme in 2015 and transferring it to local authorities has, by the DWP's own admission, caused severe hardship for many recipients. And we've heard repeatedly today examples of how this has happened in various constituencies throughout the United Kingdom. And this feeds into the perception, and I say this to the Minister with utter sincerity, this feeds into the perception held by a number of people that this government is cruel and callous when it comes to supporting the sick and the disabled. Now, I know the Minister will reject that analysis, and I would expect her to do so. But the fact is that that perception exists, and that is a problem for the UK Government, and it's one which I hope the Minister is mindful of and really does her best to seek to address it. Because when that perception exists, it is a problem. The closure of the Independent Living Fund doesn't help to counter that perception, which I'm sure the Minister would of course seek to address. The closure of the Independent Living Fund feeds that perception. So I know the Minister will take that on board very carefully today. A huge issue of concern is the short-sighted decision, and it's been pointed out by many members today, not to ring-fence this fund when devolving it to local authorities. And the then Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for the DWP, Lord Freud, told the House of Lords in 2014 that local authorities need to be allowed to meet their statutory responsibilities in a flexible and responsive way, and the ring-fencing of funding prevents this. Well, the intentions may have been honourable, and I'm sure that they were, but there can be no doubt, and again we've heard this repeatedly today, that this has created, by accident or design, it doesn't really matter if you're the one that's suffering underneath the policy, by accident or design, this has created a postcode lottery. We've heard this from the member from East London Derry, we've heard it from the member for Strangford, and we've heard it from the member from Wrexham. And this is because local authorities are now determining their own eligibility criterion, and they may not provide, and very often don't provide, the same level of funding as the Independent Living Fund did previously. When we consider that this fund is about vital support, this cannot be acceptable, and it's a decision that really needs, in all good conscience, to be revisited. And I urge the Minister to do so, and I hope after this debate that she will be minded to do so. But we have to remember...
I'm very grateful to have given way, and I very much take the point that she's making. And isn't it made worse because budgets broadly are decreasing at the same time? So the local government bodies have the unenviable task of somehow being able to maintain levels to individuals at a time when the income that they are receiving is falling.
I very much agree with what the Honourable Member has said. Local authorities across the United Kingdom are really facing some very difficult choices at local level. But I have to say that there are many who believe, particularly in England, that local authorities are facing unprecedented levels of funding crisis. In Scotland, we've tried hard as far as possible, and it's not always possible, to protect local funding as far as possible under budgetary constraints. But I think English local authorities in particular, and Welsh local authorities, have faced real biting, deep cuts that thankfully in Scotland we're working very hard to avoid the worst excesses of, but it is an issue when you devolve something down, you don't ring fence it, and there's so many budgetary pressures, it creates a real difficulty in what you prioritise and what you're able to do.
On a point about local authority budgets, and I thank the Honourable Lady for giving me, if you take the West Midlands, for example, Birmingham, a large local authority, they've got to make cuts of just under about £1 billion. Coventry is over 100 million. Now, those are the type of pressures that's on these budgets. My own view is that central government should never, quite frankly, have devolved.
A speech rather than an intervention. Patricia Gibson.
I take on board what the Honourable Gentleman has said, that there is a sense, and we've heard it today, that devolving vital support to local authorities without either ring-fencing or properly funding it really is a way of dodging responsibility. And I know that the Minister will seek to address that, because it's a situation that is simply not sustainable when you consider how important this support is for those living with disabilities. But it is a matter of deep disappointment that in 2010 the Labour government in office tightened the fund so that it would only accept applications for those employed in 16 hours a week or more. And this was done essentially with no consultation. And it was one of the last acts of the outgoing Labour government, which is a matter of great disappointment to so many people, particularly given the fact that we know how important this fund is, and we know how many disabled people throughout the United Kingdom looked at that time on the Labour government as their champions to support their rights and support their support. And we know that tightening of the eligibility, as I said earlier in the debate, was perhaps, many would argue, certainly disability organisations have argued, that this was the first step, if you like, in signing the death warrant of the fund itself, which is deeply unfortunate. But, Madam Chair, we in Scotland have chosen a different path. The devolution of powers permits various constituent parts of the UK to do things differently if they see fit. And that's what devolution is all about. And I say, I think, in just about every debate that I participate in, I don't really care where a good idea comes from. If it's a good idea, we should all seek to emulate it. And I would urge the Minister today to look carefully at the practice in the Independent Living Fund in Scotland, because this shouldn't be party political. This should be about seeking to do what is best for those who rely on essential support. Politics really shouldn't come into that. Party politics shouldn't come into that. So I would urge the Minister to look carefully at what's going on in Scotland and learn whatever lessons she thinks can be of use and of support in England in helping to give the essential support that is needed. And the Honourable Member for Wrexham is absolutely right. These are not easy decisions. It's never easy when you're thinking about how to spend taxpayers' money. But I think we live in a society where most people would agree that supporting the people who are living with a disability to live independently in their community and contribute in the best way that they can to their communities, which is what they want to do, then that is something that is really worth looking at seriously. So it's not easy, but some things are too important to be always guided by pounds, shillings and pence. I will indeed.
Information. Can she tell me if the present Scottish Fund is now open to new applicants?
I can answer that question for the Honourable Gentleman. It opened at the end of 2017, and I'm just going to make a few remarks about that. In Scotland, the SNP Scottish Government created the public body, the Independent Living Fund Scotland, in 2015, and that was on the back of the UK Government closing. And there was £47.2 million to be administered of the former Independent Living funding, and that was to support 2,600 people in Scotland, with 99% of those recipients stating that this fund helps them live their lives more independently. In addition, the Scottish Government injected an additional £5 million to support those aged between 16 and 21, a transitional fund to help them into adulthood, and from the end of last year open to new applications. But we mustn't lose sight of what this fund is for. It is to help recipients of all ages to contribute to and participate in their communities, something we can all support and get behind. We want people, all people, whether they're living with a disability or not, to live as independently and as productively as they possibly can. And the Scottish Government has worked with those living with a disability to develop this fund to ensure that they have choices and are treated with dignity, respect and fairness. And the Scottish Transitions Forum, a national network of over 850 professionals, young people, parents, carers, funded by the Scottish Government, has helped to inform the progress of policies in this area. It's essential, and it should go without saying, that the voices of the people who are going to be directly affected by the policy, their voices should help to shape that policy from the bottom up. And I would urge the Minister today to ensure that going forward across the United Kingdom, that policies and initiatives, particularly with regard to those living with a disability, that their voices are heard and are at the heart of the process going forward to help improve this situation. Thank you.